Hello everyone, I am Dr. Miftahul Barbaruah. It's an excellent opportunity to interact with you all today. I am going to present on the regulation of veterinary paraprofessionals. During the first session of this workshop, we have already discussed the OI definition of veterinary paraprofessionals, so I am skipping this in this presentation. My presentation will have three sections. In section A, our objective is to reflect on why is regulation of VPP important. In this section, we will discuss in general why we need a legislation and what should be our approach in developing legislation. In section B, we will focus on OI guidelines on veterinary legislation on Terrestrial Animal Health Code 3.4.6. And finally, in section C, we will explore the opportunity of aligning our VPP regulatory framework to various other standards. Legislation is the basis of a regulatory system. So let us first explore why we need legislation. The Greek philosopher Aristotle said, "Law is order and good law is good order." Our societies and communities rely on social orders. The order in whatever we do keeps us moving forward instead of falling apart. The legislation or law ensures protection and welfare. In the case of veterinary service, the legislation protects in terms of public health and ensures animal welfare. The legislation brings legal certainty. You can expect decisions will be made according to rules, not arbitrarily. In a way, it protects a person or a professional and helps create an appropriate job environment. The legislation ensures transparency and brings in accountability. For example, a veterinary paraprofessional registered under the law will remain accountable for any assigned job role. If we refer to the OI definition of veterinary paraprofessionals, we will observe few important things. Firstly, the OI has avoided naming categories of veterinary paraprofessionals. Secondly, the assumption is that veterinary paraprofessional will receive formal training at either the certificate, diploma or degree level from institutions accredited by the appropriate government agency or veterinary statutory body. And finally, the activities they are permitted to conduct will reflect their level of formal training. The country context and national policy decides veterinary paraprofessional categories, functions, training and prerogative, etc. Of course, the alignment to specific guideline helps improve service delivery and equivalence of qualifications awarded and inter-country mobility of veterinary paraprofessionals. The legislation flows from country policy and implementation of legislation help achieve the desired outcome. We have already discussed that legislation or law ensures protection, accountability and welfare. You will admit that veterinary paraprofessional regulation will greatly support addressing global challenges such as achievement of Sustainable Development Goal, full implementation of One Health approach, assurance for responsible behavior to prevent antimicrobial resistance, help to ensure food safety, and assistance in handling challenges posed by threat of bioterrorism. It has been a one-sided discussion till now, so let us have a Mentimeter time. I want to request you to reflect and share any word or words that comes to your mind to justify the need for legislation to regulate veterinary paraprofessionals. We will come back to results towards the end of the session. So to summarize, the legislation provides a legal framework for regulatory system of veterinary paraprofessional to exist and operate. Many countries have already taken steps to enact new legislation or improve their existing legislations integrating veterinary paraprofessionals. Here I want to quote John Tan, a renowned American businessman. He said, Regulators are in the best position to regulate when they are intimately knowledgeable about the activities they are regulating. Therefore, it is imperative to understand the country context and practices involving veterinary paraprofessional services. Since many of you will help your country enact appropriate legislation, I want to quote Louis Dambich Brandy, a renowned lawyer and judge, to highlight the importance of quality legislation. He said, "If we desire respect for the law, we must make law respectable." You are aware that to help countries enact quality legislations, OIE provides targeted support programs like the Veterinary Legislation Support Program. Again, to quote Robert Winston, it is important that legislation keep pace with scientific progress. I often highlight that technology can facilitate the implementation of any regulation. For example, countries are now exploring digital options for critical legal requirements of supervision of veterinary paraprofessionals by veterinarians and documentation of health events attended by veterinary paraprofessionals. I want to end this first section of the presentation by highlighting the need to create awareness amongst veterinary paraprofessionals about the provision of law and the responsibility thereof following their registration under appropriate legislation. We need to help veterinary paraprofessionals appreciate that privileges and responsibilities go together. I often quote the saying as popularized by Marvel Comics character Spider-Man, "With great power comes the great responsibility." In this section of presentation, we will briefly look into OIE guidelines on veterinary legislation and veterinary paraprofessionals as per the Terrestrial Animal Health Code 3.4.6. Chapter 3.4 of the OIE Terrestrial Animal Health Code contains guidelines on various veterinary legislations. Out of these guidelines, we will quickly discuss section 3.4.6 to understand guidelines related to veterinary paraprofessionals. You can access Terrestrial Animal Health Code online to learn more. The legislation covering veterinary paraprofessionals must have 7 aspects as per the Terrestrial Animal Health Code 3.4.6. First, there should be a provision of a regulator. In most cases, the legislation allows regulation of both veterinarians and veterinary paraprofessionals under one statutory body. The second aspect is defining various permitted categories of veterinary paraprofessional specific to the country context. The third aspect is the prerogative or the rights or privileges of each of the categories of veterinary paraprofessionals. The fourth is the minimum initial and continuous education requirement and competencies for each category of veterinary paraprofessionals. Please note that it's both initial and continued education. The fifth aspect is the condition for recognition of qualification. The sixth is condition for performing the activities of veterinary medicine and science, including the extent of supervision for each category. The seventh aspect is the power to deal with conduct and competence issues, including licensing requirements and mechanism to appeal. It is always good to refer to existing country legislation and discuss all the 7 aspects of Terrestrial Animal Health Code 3.4.6 referred earlier. For example, I have shared a few screenshots of the Veterinary and Paraveterinary Profession Act 19 of 1982 of South Africa. Section 2 of the Act provides the establishment of South African Veterinary Council. If you look into the objective included in Section 3, it aptly covers a broader dimension of the regulatory role to be played by the Council covering both veterinarians and veterinary paraprofessionals. Section 21 of the primary South African Act mentioned earlier keeps the option open for secondary legislation like gazette notification from time to time describing any supporting profession to whom the rules under the provision of the Act will apply. Today in South Africa, we have many categories of veterinary paraprofessionals such as animal health technicians, laboratory animal technologists, veterinary nurses, veterinary physiotherapists, and veterinary technologists. The section is helpful as the need for new veterinary paraprofessional category may emerge soon with scientific progress of the veterinary profession. One of the most challenging parts is the consensus on the prerogatives or privileges for each category of veterinary paraprofessionals. For example, Section 29 of the South African Veterinary and Paraveterinary Profession Act ensures that the veterinary paraprofessionals uses appropriate designations while practicing the profession. Considering the time constraints, we are not discussing more examples. Instead, let us hope for a more detailed hands-on workshop with experts soon. This final section will quickly refer to some international standards and frameworks. Aligning the veterinary paraprofessionals regulatory framework with these standards can help build consistency across countries, statistical comparison of workforce data, equivalence in certification, and improve inter-country mobility of the workforce. While describing the categories of veterinary paraprofessionals, one can refer to the International Standard Classification of Occupations. One can also refer to country-level classifications. For example, within ASEAN, Singapore has recently published the updated Singapore Standard Occupational Classification 2020, where veterinary technicians and assistants are classified under Measure Group 3 titled Associate Professionals and Technicians. Another good example is to refer to the classification of health workers by World Health Organization. Another relevant standard is the International Standard Classification of Education, ISCED 2011. Though the situation may differ from country to country, we may align veterinary paraprofessional education with ISCED Level 5, which is short cycle tertiary education of a minimum 2 years full-time equivalent duration below bachelor or equivalent. For the ASEAN region, the alignment of veterinary paraprofessional qualification with the ASEAN Qualification Reference Framework will be of significant importance. The ASEAN Qualification Reference Framework places all qualification into 8 levels based on learning outcomes. The level description covers 2 domains, knowledge and skills, and application and responsibilities. More than 100 countries have or are in the process of developing national qualification frameworks. Besides the ASEAN framework already referred to, other regional frameworks exist, such as European Qualification Framework, South African Development Community Qualification Framework, etc. For example, in the recent years, India aligned its long-term and short-term trained veterinary paraprofessional occupations into Level 5 and Level 3 respectively of the National Skill Qualification Framework. National Occupational Standards, which describe the knowledge, skills, and understanding an individual needs to be competent at a job, are already guiding veterinary paraprofessional training aimed at industry professionals in various countries. Industry-led certifying bodies that use National Occupational Standards in veterinary paraprofessional domain include LANTRA, an awarding body for land-based industries in United Kingdom and Republic of Ireland, Rural Skills Australia, and Agriculture Skill Council of India. Before we end this presentation, let us review the results of the Mentimeter survey, where I requested you to write any word or words that come to your mind as an answer to the question, why should legislation regulate VPPs? Thank you for your participation. The prominent words are professionalization, standards, and accountability. It reflects our discussion in section 1 of this presentation that legislation regulating VPPs help bring order or professionalism and, most importantly, transparency and accountability. Thank you for listening to the presentation.